Welcome everyone to Power Lunch. We have a very special guest today. I'm really excited to go ahead and hang out with this next guest. Advisor, board member, and industry titan, veteran of 5 decades, former CEO and chairman of Firehouse Subs, author of Final Battles of Platon's Vanguard, and recipient of surely so many awards. We have like 20 of them here, so I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll maybe mention one or two, maybe the Silver Plate Award from the International Food Manufacturers Association. I mean, this man took a small regional chain and sold it to RBI for $1 billion. They had a couple of locations, and when he was done, 1,200 locations. He's also a great trumpeter. He's going to do a live performance, maybe not. Maybe I'm making that out. Mr. Don Fox.
Thanks, Nabil. It's great to be with you. I do have a trumpet close by. Push come to shove, I could do that. It could become a prerequisite for appearing, right? No musical talent, you don't show up with Nabil.
No musical talent, but you sold the business to RBI for $1 billion? Sorry, can't do it. We need a musical skill. All right, so let's get started. I have so many questions for you. First, I just wanted to thank you for your time. I was so shocked and surprised you said yes to doing this. I think Amy either harassed you into it or my team. I don't know who it was, but thank you for being with us.
It wasn't a difficult sell. Pleased to be here.
Thank you for being here. Let's go back to Jersey. Your first job, little Italian spot. You're a teenager. You started as a dishwasher. Let's just go there. What happened? How'd you get that job? How's that like?
I had a good friend who'd gotten his first job there and sort of dragged me into it. Just turned 16. It was time to get to work. Was looking forward to it. Family-owned business. My family, certainly. I came from a very modest income, blue-collar family. And I loved the vibe. Like everyone else, especially kids starting to work there, I started as a dishwasher and very quickly learned that I wanted to advance beyond that. It was tough. Back in those days, we didn't even have 3-compartment sinks. It was a 2-compartment sink. And everything was done manually. There were no machine dishwashers. And I learned one of my most valuable lessons in the restaurant industry very quickly, especially when you work in an Italian restaurant. You discover that your best friend is the person who stirs the sauce pot.
Yes. Yeah.
All dishwashers will understand that. So it speaks to teamwork and the fact that you're all dependent upon each other. And again, I was eager to get promoted off of that station. The biggest promotion in my life would have been making it to the salad station, which is the next place you want to packing order. And it was 10 feet from where I washed dishes, but boy, I wanted to get over there so badly. So what did I do? I watched what was happening. I trained myself to get there. And those are real lessons in life. And I advanced beyond that to making pizzas, working the oven. And you just realize, even back then, and the same holds true today, the restaurant industry is very hard work. It's a tough industry, but working hard at it is a choice. And that was a choice I made early on. And little did I know I would end up spending 50 years and counting in the restaurant industry. My aspiration was to be a musician, a trumpet player, and life takes you in down paths that you can never completely anticipate, I think.
Parents were happy that you got this job, or they wanted when you were going down this hospitality path, back then I'm sure it was not as cool. Looking back, you have had such a legendary career. What was the family saying back then?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, my parents were glad that I was motivated to go work. But that wasn't unusual back then. Most kids in high school aspired to do that. And it was interesting. That was in the end of my sophomore year, going into my junior year of high school. Where I grew up in New Jersey, we were very close to where Six Flags Amusement Park is. It's one of great adventure is the park. And that was the place to work. Everybody in high school wanted to go work. And the coveted jobs that kids wanted, they wanted to work in the amusement area or the gift shop and the air conditioning or doing the rides.
Yes.
Food service was about the last place anybody wanted to work. That and the grounds crew were the least sought. I wanted a job. I wanted to guarantee that I was going to get it. So I took my year of working in that little Italian restaurant. And when I showed up to interview along with hundreds of other kids, I said, hey, this is where I want to go. And yeah, guarantee me a job, because I'm one of the rare people who said, yes, I'll go work in restaurants. And I ended up working 4 years. At a very young age, moved my way up into multi-unit management by the time I was 22. And I was in college for less than a year. I went as a music major, decided to leave because I would just I thought it was better to just go play and pursue a career playing music out on the Jersey Shore. It was a hotbed. But I discovered that was a tough way to make a living, and the long-term prospects weren't good. So I decided to focus on a restaurant career. And that is what led me to move to Florida to join Burger King Corporation, again, at that very young age. And then really began to take it seriously as my vocation, and foresaw at that moment when I decided to commit to it, that is what I would likely do for the duration of my career. Never again could I have imagined quite where that was going to lead, and eventually to the role as a CEO of Firehouse. But one thing that guided me throughout that, and advice I give, especially when I speak to college and high school students, is at every juncture in your career, give it 100%. Even if it's not what you think you're going to be doing over the long term. Only one thing will happen if you don't give it 100%. You won't get the full reward out of it. You may miss opportunities that would present themselves because you're noticed as not giving 100%. Learn as much as you can in those roles. You never know how that knowledge is going to benefit you down the line. There's no way to predict it. The only thing you can safely predict is that you will have lost opportunities. And a bit of advice I give people too as well. And I won't say this is a completely original thought, but I do forget where I heard it, but it's powerful, which is there is no such thing as giving more than 100%. When you say that you've given something 110%, 120%, 1,000%, all you've done is discover your true 100%. And if people keep that in mind, I think they'll be perpetually inspired to always try harder.
That's beautiful. We have such a similar story in some ways. The early parts, I started in the restaurant business as a busboy at 16 and worked for the same burger joint for a decade here in New York. So we're neighbors too. And I spent a lot of time at the Six Flags in Jersey. And that's where the high school took you once a year. So it's just awesome to hear that story. Are you still in Jersey?
No. I moved to Florida in 1980. That's when I left New Jersey. And my travels with Burger King took me from starting in Tampa, down to Miami, back to Tampa, back to Miami, and then to Jacksonville. And I was with Burger King in 2003 when I was re-engineered out of the business. Never expected that to happen, by the way. I would have thought I was going to be with Burger King throughout my career, but I had stalled a bit in middle management.
You were there for 23 years, right?
Yeah, 23 years. It started in field operations, made my way up the pretty conventional ladder to restaurant manager, district manager, franchise field consultant. But probably the most important thing that happened to me during my 23-year tenure was in 1989, I was asked to go to Miami headquarters, serve in research and development. There probably, as there is today, there was what was called an operations R&D department. And you were brought in as an expert in restaurant operations to lend your knowledge and skill in the restaurant to support the research and development teams. So you were dealing with product development, equipment engineering, architectural design of restaurants, every facet of the restaurant, because everything in the end makes its way into store operations one way or the other. So originally that was going to be a 2-year assignment and then rotate back out to the field. But the Burger King was sold right after I got to Miami in 89. It had been owned by Pillsbury. It was purchased by Grand Metropolitan, which later became Diageo. And then that turned into a permanent assignment and 6 years. But during that time, I embraced the philosophy that I've always learn everything you can. And rather than just limit my work to being that operations expert, I had an insatiable appetite for what everybody else on the project teams were doing. So during that 6 years, I just continued to learn everything about marketing, food science, supply chain, everything I could. And not knowing exactly how that might parlay into an opportunities for myself, but where it paid vast dividends is when I went to Firehouse in 2003, 65 restaurants. When I showed up, became a chief operating officer relatively quickly and then CEO. I knew enough about every part of the business to be effective. And I think most importantly, to know the questions to ask, and then also to decipher good talent that would come in to each of the fields as we had to build out the team. So that 6 years in Miami in that R&D role was just pivotal, set me up for success that I probably would not have enjoyed otherwise.
I love that. Why did you decide to join Firehouse Subs? What was it about the brand itself? Only a few locations. Why bet on that? And you bet you won big, but...
It was all for personal circumstances. My family was young then. My oldest son was only 11. My youngest son, 8.5, 9, heavily involved in the community. My wife, at that juncture, having had my entire career in quick service restaurants, the natural thing would have been for me to speak to the larger brands, Wendy's, McDonald's, Arby's at the time. They were headquartered up in Atlanta. And those were some of the companies that I initially reached out to. But it was very important to my family that we try to find a way to stay in Jacksonville. And there were, with any of the major companies, there was no opportunity that was going to allow that. So I turned aside other opportunities and just tried to focus on what was here. And as you might imagine, at the time, well, Firehouse was about the largest food company that was actually based here. And they happened to be in need of someone at the time to help lead the development of the franchise side of the system. They were at a very early stage. They didn't have any industry professionals with experience supporting or developing franchise systems. I had a ton of experience supporting the franchise side of Burger King operations and brought that to the table. And then coupled with all that organizational and broader industry knowledge that I gained from my R&D experience. It was less than a year and a half, I think, that I went from being director of the franchise side of the business to the chief operating officer. And at that point, there was not a CEO over that element of the organization anyway. I reported to what was called Office of the President, which were the four principal owners of the company, the two co-founders and two other gentlemen with minority interest. And that was an interesting skill set I had to acquire to basically not report into an individual, but to a team like that. But then in 2009, I gained the confidence to become the first CEO of Firehouse of America, which was the franchising entity. There were some subsidiary companies related. In effect, for practical purposes, I led the breadth of the organization under the banner of Firehouse America. And then, so much storytelling to be done from that point to getting to about 1,250 restaurants at the time I retired. But just kudos to the team. I know sometimes this can sound a bit cliche-ish, but it's nevertheless true. I had the privilege to lead a great team, help build it. They just did a marvelous job. I like to think I gave them the runway and the bandwidth to do what they did best. And it was really a team effort to get where we did.
What did you do that was visible where the folks around you said, okay, we need Don to step up as our COO? You were director of franchise compliance and you very quickly moved to COO. What is it you were doing that other leaders can learn from you that put you in a position to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and lead this, to 1,250 locations when we left?
Yeah, I think there were a few things. Number one, I demonstrated an active interest, not just volunteering to do things, but actively stepping in and doing things that were perhaps outside of my described lane and constantly looking for opportunities. And you have to be careful when you come into a new organization. Sometimes people can be too aggressive in terms of wanting to implement change, and we can really rub some people the wrong way, and it ends up being bad for the team environment. So some advice that I often give people, and I certainly applied this when I got to Firehouse, is approach it at first from the perspective that you want to help people avoid making the mistakes that you've seen because you're concerned, you care about the organization, and you bring this knowledge to the table that will help them from stepping on landmines. And sometimes it takes real candor to say, look, these are the mistakes I made in the past, and I learned from them, and I certainly would want to not see us make those mistakes here. That's a much different approach than going forward and saying, hey, I got a great idea of what we should do, and just attacking it as though got all these ideas and you're going to force this change. And maybe the difference is subtle, but I think it's important that you're doing it to really try to help. And again, initially, more from that angle of preventing liabilities from occurring to the organization. And then you've gained confidence and you can work your way into doing the more proactive brainstorming and ideation to advance the organization even further. And also, I'm a bit more empathetic on the point I'm going to make than I used to be. I was a workaholic. I worked all hours. I did whatever it took. I think I was still successful in keeping balance. I coached my kids' baseball teams. It was one of the reasons we stayed in Jacksonville. That was career sacrifice. Family was secondary to career aspirations with other companies at that point, especially when you're starting an organization and it is lean. And I know you understand this as an entrepreneur, where it's even more poignant when you're skin in the game and you're trying to build this thing. Just wanting to do whatever it would take. I was the first person in, I was the last person out. Which, by the way, even up until the end, that was my philosophy. It was rare that I wasn't the first person into the office. And it was rare that I wasn't the last person out, all the way up until March of 2023, because leading by example is so critically important. I became more empathetic and more understanding as I matured that not everybody's in a position to do that. I had a very supportive family at home that allowed me to do it. That, again, back in the early days with Firehouse, we were a 2-tier franchising system back then. And so it was instrumental that we first find area representatives that occupied the first tier of the franchising ladder. And there were a finite number of them. By our estimation, we would need about 50, 55 area reps around the country. I didn't have the luxury of a dedicated sales team in the early days to go find those people. I had to take that on. I was answering the calls. When I'm looking for candidates in California and the Pacific Northwest, recognizing the 3-hour time difference. Well, my workday went till 8, 9 o'clock at night. I'm trying to balance out my workload. And if I know that I've got an opportunity to conduct business with folks at 7, 8 o'clock Eastern time, and that's all, and I'm generally not doing business with that many people on the East or central parts of the country at that time, well, I'm going to reserve that time to do that work. And it means stay late. And there were numerous times when I'd be calling people at 4 and 5 o'clock Pacific time, and they were impressed. What are you doing working so late? It said something to them about our interest, my interest, work ethic, spoke volumes. But that's because people observe. They see what you're doing. They watch your behavior. It's what's so important about leading by example. Especially what I remind leaders of is that the people that you lead have a far greater ability to watch you and what you do than you do to observe them. Everything you do as a leader is observed. Everything. And it's taken note of and interpreted. You can't do that with your staff. There are fractional moments. But every minute that you put yourself out there, it's observed. So, and there are times I would catch myself, and I'm not going to say I always set the best example at all things. But if I failed in some way, I learned from it and corrected, but became ever conscious of the fact that everything I would do mattered. I'll give you a real tangible example because this adds up in the smallest of ways. We had 39, 40 company-owned restaurants here in the home market of Jacksonville. So a benefit that we gave to our staff members was a discount on meals. And that varied depending on what level you were at. Now, the restaurant employees got 50% off on their meals. The general manager or managers in the restaurant got a free meal. Different perks for the corporate staff. The headquarters staff, if you were a certain level, you got a free meal yourself. I was entitled to a free meal. I never took a free meal, ever, once. Because when I go into that restaurant, that company-owned restaurant, again, everybody is watching me. Every person on that team. I am the last person in that organization that needed a free meal. I'm going to lead by example, and I am going to pay 100% for my meal. And by the way, I'm not going to get in line in front of any guest. If another guest comes in, I'm going to step behind them and I'm going to let them go in front of me. I will be the last person because that's being observed. If I'm going to espouse to my staff that the guest is the person in that restaurant that matters most, that they are to be treated like gold, that you love your guests because your job depends upon them, then you will never put yourself before them. How can I go ahead and stand in line before them? When I know that those employees that are working harder in a given day than I ever will, slinging sandwiches in terms of physical work, and they're getting 50% off on a meal, and I'm coming in and getting free, and a manager that's trying to make a bonus, and he's trying to manage his discount line. Right? But he's got corporate employees coming in and chewing away at that. No, I want to contribute to his profitability. I want to come in like a regular customer pay and add to his EBITDA. So believe me, that gets noticed by those members. And just take that as an example and multiply it by 1,000 things that you do. Every one matters.
I'm taken back by that statement, and I'm going to make note of it because I've heard a version of this that made a smaller impact on me, which was everything you say that is critical hurts 10 times more, and everything you say that positive feels 10 times better. So please use your words wisely. And what you're saying is a much larger expression of that. So I'm learning from this, and I hope everyone else is as well who's listening. Yeah. So how's retirement like?
Well, it's great. I'll call it semi-retirement. It's certainly not classic retirement.
I know you're on 15 boards of 15 different nonprofits. So I don't know how retired you are.
But what is a big difference is the things that you're engaged in that don't carry the same day-to-day weight of responsibility that certainly being at a high-level executive, definitely as a CEO, I think that I managed that well throughout my career. People often ask about stress and so on, and I think that I did a good job managing that. Certainly, the pandemic was the most stressful period. If there was any time I felt it, those were.
How did you manage it?
Gosh, I mean, through some basic tenets of leadership. I mean, I knew there were certain things I had to do. One is a lesson I learned a long time ago from my military studies, and that was to focus on what is called mission-style orders. If you were trying to micromanage, at least in my opinion, trying to micromanage through the pandemic, you'd kill yourself. So I very quickly distilled what we had to do into several mission orders for the group. One was, look, as a team, every decision we make needs to be put through the filter on what it takes to help franchisees keep their restaurants open. Knowing that when you're down 45% in system sales after the first week, and that continues for 3 to 4 weeks, that is not sustainable. And remember, PPP wasn't known yet. I mean, we didn't know what resources. So all you know is the current condition, trying to use all the data that you can. And we did a good job of this in terms of eventually understanding the trajectory of things. Took a few weeks to get our hands around that, but we did masterfully. But when it was at its worst, it was foreseeable that we would lose hundreds of restaurants, and perhaps franchisees would close them out of desperation with the intent of closing them temporarily. But as a franchisor, when a franchisee closes their restaurant, even though they may profess an interest in reopening it, we have lost control of our destiny at that point as a franchisor. So I understood that from the get-go. So the direction to the team was, we will collectively work to do everything we can to help every franchisee stay open. So one of the first things I did, I remember it was Friday the 13th was sort of the official day when things really started to go downhill, and we knew things were really bad by the time we got through that first weekend. I announced to our franchise system that Monday, just several days into this, that we were going to stop the collection of all royalties. And the next day I stopped collection of all advertising, because to subscribe to my mission order, I needed to keep every penny in the franchisee's pocket, not knowing what was going to be ahead of us. But kudos to the founders of Firehouse, our principal owners. We had a culture of frugality. We were in very good financial condition at that point. So immediate cash flow from royalty payments coming in was not critical at that juncture to the organization. Everybody has finite resources. That was not going to be sustainable for months and months and months. But in the moment, I could do it. And that, of course, was deeply appreciated by the franchise community. Actually, from our loyalty program, this is very powerful. We were able to measure activity within our loyalty program to identify when we had reached the bottom of the sales decline. And because we had very excellent information on loyalty member behavior in a large enough database that we had this almost real-time view on how they were behaving. And as they started to behave differently, we had no reason to believe that the general population wouldn't as well. Maybe not on exactly the same timeline, but it should start to take the same trajectory, and it did. So, to start to rescue sales, again, talking about the power of mission orders, the mission order I gave the team was, and I announced this to the entire franchise community, sales are going to come back because of actions we take. We cannot leave it to chance or fate or outside forces to do it. We have got to make this happen. And every day, even if compared to yesterday, system sales went up $1, that's a victory. They cannot retreat. And so every day, each one of us in every restaurant has to embrace an attitude that we are going to do something today to increase sales. And that will start to collectively lift the system. And it did. We had positive comps after just 10 weeks, and then went on to set record sales by the end of 2020, and then even better in 2021. That mentality, even though we still had some of the specter of the pandemic around us, but we were out of the worst of it, and sales surged phenomenally. We were up 22% in 2021. So some pretty basic concepts. And this was very important. Having ownership's confidence. I always will be thankful to the Sorensens. They're the two brothers are the principal owners of the company, held the vast majority of it. The pandemic starts, sales are down 45%. They're seeing years of work go potentially down the drain. All this value that they had built up and potentially losing it all. It was a testimony to the confidence they had in me that at that juncture, they didn't come in and get their hands deeply into it to try to influence, but they had the faith in me to take the course that we did. And there were things we had to do collaboratively. I couldn't completely unilaterally decide I was going to stop collecting royalty. I had to express that to them. that, hey, this is something we really need to do. But at every turn, everything I requested of them, they went along with. Even very powerfully, when we stopped collecting the royalty, we were deferring it because we didn't know where this was going to end up. And presumably we would go back and set up a payment, a collection for it at some point. We navigate through this, sales recover, we're back stronger than ever. And by late summer, now, and again, keeping in mind, not everybody recovered at the same pace, a lot of regional differences, but we had made remarkable progress and we were back to everybody paying royalty at that point. And then started to have the discussion about, well, what do we do with the deferred royalty? It was about $5 million, as I recall. And so not chump change for an organization of our size at the time. And I made the pitch to ownership that we should forgive it. Everybody had been through this unprecedented experience. We rode the oars together. We were back to record sales and doing phenomenally well. But it all came in large part because of the effort of the franchisees. We don't run the restaurants. They had to bear the burden through the pandemic of getting their team in and doing all these things, and had a number of other costs associated, extraordinary costs that were associated with trying to operate through the pandemic that they had to endure. And my belief was we were in a very unique position in time to, in essence, gift them this in recognition of everything we've been through together. And that if I did that, they would probably never forget it. And I wasn't looking for people to be indebted. What I was hoping to gain from it was even more loyalty than what we had. Because again, we didn't have to do it, and most franchisors probably would not have, but we were in a position to do it and really capitalize in some ways on what had been a very bad situation.
I mean, like, you have to. And I hope you're writing a book about your journey through Firehouse Subs and your journey through this very difficult period. Just hearing it, I'm stressed just hearing it. And you had lived through it. The number of times you had to step up and show leadership, and the founders jumping into bet on you again and again. What an inspiring story. I got to know you guys during the pandemic as well. A little bit about Lunchbox. Lunchbox bought a company that you guys use at, all 1,000 plus of your location, Novodyne.
And yeah, Novodyne did great work with the organization. Of course, all that was taking place while I was still there, and they're great partners.
Yeah. So I got to ask you one question. You were at Burger King for 23 years and you guys part ways, not in great ways, right? And then you build this amazing business, Firehouse Subs, and now you're selling it to Burger King's parent company. Did you see the irony there? Did you enjoy it at all, or you were mature to care?
I absolutely saw the irony in it. And it was interesting. The founders, Firehouse was a closely held company, and the founders had started investigating the sales process in earnest at the end of July of 2021. Coincidentally, it was the same day I had a heart attack while hiking in the mountains of North Carolina. Unknown to them, I'm in a pretty bad spot while they've kicked off the sales process. I'm working with TD Securities, who brokered the sale. So that process, the ball got rolling, and I'm in a whole different place with the heart attack, but fortunately recovered extraordinarily well. All ended up being good. 7 weeks later, then they brought me and our CFO at the time, Vince Berchiante. We were the only two people brought into the process with the ownership team to start to work on the sale process. And at that point, the process had been narrowed down to two companies, one of which was Restaurant Brands International. And the day that Robin Sorensen told me what was happening, and I don't feel it'd be fair to mention the other company, so I'll just say with RBI, my reaction was like, you're joking, right? All due respect to RBI. RBI was, of course, there's the lineage going back to Burger King, but all different people, much different organization. But that caught me by surprise. But it turned out to be an excellent coincidence, because as we prepared for management presentations, and then I had a chance to meet Jose Sill, who was the CEO at the time of RBI. We didn't know each other during our Burger King years. We had a 3-year overlap from 2000 to 2003. Completely different roles. I got in field operations. Jose was a staff attorney, I think, during that period. That was his role when he entered BK. But fast forward almost 20 years, and from the time I left, we knew a lot of the same people. I knew the culture of Burger King. I knew the history of Burger King. We had so much in common. So the day we met, we hit it off tremendously well. And it was common ground that with any other acquiring entity wouldn't have existed. It really eased the process, and I think made not just the sale process, obviously getting to the finish line with RBI, but then the process that followed afterward on integrating Firehouse into RBI made it a better process than it might have been otherwise.
Well, life is, it works out in funny ways. And when I was connecting the dot there, I was like, I get to ask Mr. Fox about the irony there. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there was some poetic justice there.
What was challenging was that at a very late stage in my career, I was, especially after going through the heart attack, and that changes your perspective on some things in terms of your, not just mortality, but your longevity in the business. It did start to generate some different discussion at home about, is it time to retire? Put some different things in perspective. I had at that point thought that there would be a completely different challenge professionally going to a large public company, and at this very late stage in my career, trying to succeed at it. It was going to be a bit apples and oranges. When it was a closely held private company, I again, as I mentioned, it wasn't like I do everything unilaterally. There would be things I would go to the ownership team for, but for most things, I had free reign to call the shots and everything I needed to do. And just being all of a sudden, while it was great to have achieved $1 billion in system sales, all of a sudden we're 1/35th of the RBI ecosystem, and entirely different mechanisms for how you operate as a public company. And so one of my goals coming in was to show that Firehouse could contribute to the success, sort of outpunch our weight as a subsidiary of RBI. So that was the approach I took into it. But that wasn't my only objective. I had a very passionate interest in trying to make it as successful a transition for the team as I could. And that was one of the, to be candid, one of the disappointing things, that it was, in all cases, I'll just put this on myself. I think I could have been more successful in some respects. I did anticipate that I knew the change was going to be significant. In fact, one thing that I told a lot of the team members was, look, I can't tell you up front whether being under new ownership is going to be better or worse. Can't say. I don't know. All right, what I can guarantee you is it's going to be different. And this is going to be something that some of you are well suited for and you embrace, and it may be something that some of you are not. And you're just going to find it's not for you. And I had no way of knowing up front where the scales might tip on that, how many people in one camp or the other. Some of the departures became fairly immediate. Others came over longer periods of time. I loved the team that I built. Deep down, there was a hope that virtually the entire team would be able to move on and survive. I had initially had a longer term commitment to stay. I anticipated spending as much as perhaps 4 years with the brand after that, but ended up deciding, again, looking at big picture, some of my own health concerns. Once I felt that I successfully, and I do believe we were very successful, maybe with some bumps along the line, but we were successful in evolving and bringing Firehouse into the RBI, under the RBI umbrella, that when that mission was completed on my end, I thought, okay, mission accomplished. And I could feel good about where we were and set the organization up for success. There's an excellent successor, Mike Hancock, who joined as Chief Operating Officer shortly after the purchase. I had not had the benefit of a Chief Operating Officer. During my tenure, it was primarily myself and my CFO, Vince, who provided the top level leadership in the company. So having a very experienced hand in the form of Mike Hancock helped take some pressure off of me, frankly, and brought somebody in with deep RBI experience that I didn't have and could help navigate some of the corridors within RBI. So especially once I felt he was well suited to succeed me, it made the decision to step aside quite a bit easier. So I continue to wish him all the best success. I still have a light attachment to the brand. I continue to serve on the board of the Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation, which
Yes.
I'm extraordinarily proud of the work we've done there.
How much did you guys donate so far in total?
It's sitting right at about $90 million. Yeah.
90 million. Wow. That is incredible. Can we end with that, sir?
Sure.
Why was it important for you? Whenever we talk about Firehouse Subs, it has such a community focus and it has such a focus to give back. Why was it so important to you? And it seems like when I hear your story and your journey, you've done that time and again, and how you treat the franchisees, how you treat the customers on the line, how you treat the people that work for you at these locations. Why was this important for you to set up? I feel like...
the founders and the brand were always dedicated to supporting the community in various ways, but we had this opportunity in 2005 to create the foundation. And then it took about 4 or 5 years for it to really pick up momentum and steam and work out the fundraising mechanisms. And when you see the difference it's making, of course, it's deeply rooted with our brand because we were founded by 2 firefighters and deep history and public safety within their family. So a lot of brands seek to give back. We had this very unique synergy with our charity of choice, self-created at that point, very unique, very powerful, and it resonated within the restaurants. But what was additionally unique about it was it is a charity, a cause that potentially benefits everyone in the community. There are thousands of great charities, and they usually touch segments of society. First responders, everybody will need a first responder at some point or another in their lives. You're going to need it. If you haven't, it's just a matter of time. And when they're there, when they're helping you, hopefully they've got all the equipment they need to save your life. When first responders had to come rescue me from a mile high on a mountain in North Carolina and hike up there to get me, they needed the equipment when they got up there. They needed a gurney to carry me down a mile. They needed oxygen. They needed all the equipment, EKG, portable EKG. They needed all these things. They didn't have it. I don't know that I get off the mountain alive. There are so many times it happens that they don't. Not every department has everything that they need. They all have needs. So it becomes very powerful, and we got very passionate about it and embrace it in the restaurants and embrace operators who embrace it. We had research done. Work was done by Cornell University to study this aspect of our brand in particular, all the way back in 2012. And they independently came up through their research with the conclusion that the commitment to the foundation in the restaurants was the highest correlating factor with sales performance. So we always wanted franchisees to embrace the foundation because of the good it did. But failing that, we said at least embrace it because it's great for your business. And then it's a virtuous circle. There's no shame in it helping the business, because the more it helps the business, the more the business can contribute back to the foundation. And it's this virtual circle that rinses and repeats and repeats. So it's grown to just this unbelievable order of magnitude. When we started our relationship with TRG, still the agency of record for Firehouse, we began our relationship with them in 2017. The founder of TRG was Stan Richards, legend in the industry. And we were first meeting with him. He asked a very poignant question. He said, look, if every Firehouse Subs restaurant closed, in the greater scheme of things, what difference would it make? What difference would it make? Does anybody really miss the sandwiches? And the answer was blatantly obvious. On the assumption that with the demise of Firehouse would be the demise of the foundation, the real shame would be that there would be untold numbers of lives that would be lost over time, because there would be, with certainty, equipment that was needed that was not there because the foundation ceased to exist, provide it. And that is powerful. That gets you up in the morning and gets you motivated to succeed in business, and certainly motivated for the foundation's success. So that is a passion of mine that continues. I'm so pleased to be able to continue to serve on the board of the foundation and keep lending my now perhaps legacy knowledge to pass that on to future generation of leaders that will continue to work with the foundation.
That's so powerful. 30-minute formats are not for folks like you. I've never wanted to, change our format more than this podcast. I've gotten through only 10% of our questions. Thank you so much for your time, and I know how busy you are. This was incredible. And you know this, but you're a 50-year overnight success. And you have so much wealth for the next generation, for me, for the industry. I'm just so happy you shared a couple of minutes with me, and it was so impactful.
Thank you, Nabil. And anything I didn't cover, I'll make sure to put in the book.
Yes, put it in the book. Well, you didn't even cover your book, by the way. I'm going to call my team and say, hey, I might have to change the format when Don's on the call because we got through none of it.
I'm happy to come back anytime to do a part 2. So
let's do it. Right. Thank you. When you guys hit 100 million at the foundation, we should do it. We should do a part 2.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mr. Fox, thank you so much.
To fly with me. Tube socks, boy, about to pop the lunchbox. Tube socks, boy.